Being successful at business takes more than luck and more than just intelligence. It takes grit, it takes courage, and it takes learning how to fail before you can succeed. Some of the most successful CEOs didn't graduate top of their class. I dare say the C-suite is not born, it's made. If I've learned anything from my colleagues, it's that we're all human. We've all had our struggles, and we've all learned some valuable lessons along the way. Because it's often those setbacks that fuel our drive to succeed. Sit back and enjoy the ride as we take a deep dive into what makes these leaders tick. They'll share their journeys with you, the good times and the tough times, even some of their most career-defining moments. This is a rare opportunity. It's a glimpse inside the minds of business leaders who shape their companies and often their whole industry. Right now, you've got a front row seat because I'm Judy Gaman and this is Front Row to CEO. Welcome to Front Row to CEO, and I'm your host, Judy Gaman. I'm sitting down with John Merris, who is the president and CEO of Solo Stove. He's also a recipient of the prestigious Ernst & Young Entrepreneur of the Year Award. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's always interesting for people who are wanting to be in the C-suite or wanting to start their own business to really see that the leaders of today just put their pants on one leg at a time. So sitting down and just asking questions really is my thing, to find out maybe what makes you tick, how you grew up. So I hope you don't mind, but I've prepared a few to kind of get in the mind of John Merris.
Sounds great. I'm looking forward to it.
Okay, well, first of all, one question I love to ask is, what was it like for you as a boy? What did you want to grow up to be?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I probably went through a lot of the phases that a lot of young boys do. I think I went through I want to be a professional athlete. Particularly, I was a soccer player, so I wanted to be a professional soccer player, I think, for a while. And then my dad was an entrepreneur, and he was kind of a businessman. So I think once I got kind of out of my 5-year-old kindergarten type phase, I think it was, I want to be a businessman. I think that really was already on my mind. I had a ton of respect for my dad. Loved watching what he did. He took me around a lot with him, so I got to see the ins and outs of meetings and what that was like, and it was pretty invigorating. It was just different every day.
That's great. Yeah. Now, going to college, did you kind of then think, oh, I want to be in a corporation or I want to own a corporation, or did you know?
Yeah, I actually, when I went to college, I ended up going through I want to be an attorney phase, which is kind of interesting. And then I ended up...
there's nothing wrong with being an attorney.
I ended up navigating away from that. I will say maybe not being an attorney as much as going to law school and then leveraging that into some sort of business career, but didn't really know. It didn't end up happening. But I think I never had the mindset of going into big corporate. That wasn't... it just wasn't on my mind. So I think it was more small to medium size, maybe run the show someday. But I wasn't a really structured, I've got a really strong game plan. It was one step at a time and figure it out as I went. Was kind of how it was for me.
Well, you did quite a fine job of figuring it out.
Well, there would be others that would be like, you got pretty lucky, So, but it has panned out. It's been phenomenal, but it was definitely, every step along the way has been a surprise for me.
So most people who are in leadership positions, they can look back and say they had a mentor. So who was your mentor, and what did you learn from that mentor?
Yeah, so I think I've had two throughout my life, and I will say I've probably two that I would call out that I've specifically have sought advice from. I am an observer, so I probably have hundreds of mentors that are not going to get credit today on this on this interview. But my dad was definitely my first mentor. He still to this day, I remember lessons and conversations, and some were intentional and some were totally not. But he has formulated and formed so much of the way that I do things. And I still look back and I'm like, oh yeah, I totally do that because of Dad. As an adult, once I have kind of left the house, and my dad and I have stayed in touch, but it's been more my wife. She is phenomenal. She's totally my sounding board, just seems to sift through and be able to see through things way faster and easier than I can, and always just throws that little piece of nugget that I need to then go and execute on. So maybe not as conventional as what other people say, but honestly, she has been, as an adult, has been my greatest mentor for sure.
Well, I love that. And it's really interesting when you get to hear a man or a woman say how the spouse really molds them, because the job doesn't go away when you go home.
No.
And I love that you acknowledge that she's a sounding board, but she also gives you great advice. And
great advice, the best advice.
Yeah, sometimes you can follow that. Has she helped you in that advice with not just business matters, but the people part of business matters?
Big, like probably more with the people side. I would say business, I mean, any leader knows that business is people. I mean, that's, you definitely can't separate those two. And of all of the things that I deal with, the most complex thing that I deal with as a leader every day is humans. Humans are unpredictable. Sometimes they're irrational. They definitely come from different experiences and backgrounds and viewpoints. And as a leader, you have to figure out how to appreciate and empathize and still lead and guide and manage despite all of the variances that you deal with as it pertains to humans. Yeah. So I would say her advice around people in particular has been immense. And my wife and I, while we think very similarly, are very different from a personality standpoint. And she brings this perspective to me that I can't see from my seat, which has been super tremendously valuable for me.
Well, let me ask you a question, John. I know that a lot of people in the C-suite and in leadership in general have really kind of struggled through the pandemic and the people part of the pandemic. You know, you have employees that have, multiple issues now. Maybe they're health issues, and maybe they're just some mental issues that have come out of it. What have you found as president and CEO has been the best approach with dealing with people who maybe aren't the same post-pandemic?
I mean, flexibility for sure is the word that comes to mind. Listening. I think I am definitely a different leader today than I was 18 months ago. There's no doubt about it. The pandemic has changed everything in the way that you have to be willing to operate. And I think that flexibility has been the key. And realizing that flexibility doesn't mean that you sacrifice productivity. Right. That you can be flexible and still be productive. And many times flexibility brings about more productivity. Whereas before, I think my mindset as a leader was structure. Structure brings productivity. And now it's more flexibility brings productivity.
Oh, for sure. I love that. And I think that's a good message to send out there. I think a lot of people have had to be incredibly flexible. I know myself as a CEO of a healthcare facility that it is definitely an ever-changing environment.
Right.
It's like, okay, masks on, masks off.
Yeah.
Now we're testing.
Work from home, come to the office.
Exactly. Yeah. It's been everything you can imagine, all wrapped into one. And there were times everybody's like, oh, I love working from home in the pajamas. And I'm like, I feel so bad for our staff because they didn't, outside of a couple of weeks, they really didn't have that, Right. It was, now we got to stay on top of everything. Right. So it's been interesting, I know, even from this side.
I would even say, just to add one more thing, is that it's okay to change your mind.
Oh.
I think that's another big one. For some reason, I don't know if it's the media or what it is about our society today, but it seems like leaders get ostracized. They just get hammered for changing their mind. And I just think it's the silliest thing.
Yeah.
It's fine to change your mind. If you're not changing your mind, then you're not adapting. Right. You're not being flexible. And I would say to any CEO out there that's feeling the pressure of, oh, but I just said last week this, and how could I possibly say something different this week? I just think that that's so bizarre. And I just don't operate that way. I am very apologetic and I acknowledge it, and it requires a vulnerability with my team. But I've found that they are actually super receptive when I say, I know last week or last month or last year I said this. Let me tell you, I changed my mind and here's why. Yeah. And they love it.
Oh,
I love that there's flexibility and vulnerability.
And going back to the flexibility, not just with your staff, be flexible with yourself.
Right.
And that's maybe where we're the most rigid in leadership. And it goes
our beliefs and our philosophies and our approaches.
It's black and white.
Yeah.
This is where I stand.
I've learned this.
Here's
and this
my
is how
own imaginary line in the sand.
Totally. And I just think being willing to smooth out those lines in the sand and move the lines and make them triangles or squares or whatever they need to be is totally fine.
For sure. I also have to ask you, what was your first job? Now, you even said you're a different CEO than you were 18 months ago.
Yeah.
But what was your first job, and how have you changed since that first job?
So I grew up on a 50-acre ranch outside of Austin, Texas, and my first job was working on the ranch in the summers. I would help out a little bit during the school year, but in particular in the summers, I worked the ranch, and it was a phenomenal experience. I still, to this day, one of my greatest work lessons ever was the summer my dad asked me to paint our white picket fence in front of our house. It was probably about a half a mile of white picket fence, and I believe that I was around 12 years old, and he wanted me to paint the front and back side by hand with a brush of this white fence. And it was summertime, it's Texas, it's super hot. And it took me, I remember, about 3 weeks to get the job done. And I remember going inside, I was super proud to go tell my dad I was done painting this fence front and back. And he walked back out, and the first thing he did before he said anything was he bent over and he looked at the bottom of each of the 2x4 rungs on this white picket fence, which I had not painted. Oh, wow. I painted the front, the back, the tops of everything. And he bent over and he looked under and he said, you're not done. And I said, what are you talking about? And he said, you didn't paint the bottom side. And I said, nobody will ever see the bottom of the fence.
I knew you were going to say it. Nobody's ever going to see it.
This is the dumbest thing I've ever heard of.
I was thinking.
And it took me a week to go back. And it would have probably only taken me an extra day accumulatively if I would have done it as I was going. Yeah. But now I had to go back.
Do it right. Or
and now
do it twice. That's
my whole mindset is, you measure twice and cut once, right? And doing it right the first time in anything, the smallest thing or the biggest task, is something that I try to do myself personally and something I try to instill in my team.
Well, I think it shows. And that kind of leads into my next question. And that is, you have an incredibly successful company. And I'd like to talk about it just for a moment.
Sure.
How you got into this company and how you've completely grown this company beyond probably even your own expectations, I would think.
For sure.
So take us on that journey.
Yeah. So from a career standpoint, I started my own business out of college. I did that for 4.5 years. And then I really wanted to go and work for somebody else. And I did that by taking a sales job. And my dad had taught me a long time ago that if you can learn to sell, you can do anything. And so I really wanted to get into sales. And I did that. And after I started really finding my own in sales, I felt like I wanted to run the show somewhere, somehow, some way, somebody to give me the opportunity. I got a message on LinkedIn from the founders of Solo Stove in 2018. And they said, hey, we heard that you're pretty good at building sales teams, and we're looking at building a sales team. Would you come in and give us some advice? And this is just maybe a good little takeaway. There was nothing for me to gain. They didn't say we're interviewing for a CEO or anything. This was just, I've always liked to give back. And I got this message, and all I thought I was doing was going to give free advice to a couple of entrepreneurs who were trying to run a business. And it turned into an 1.5 hour long conversation that ended with them saying, have you ever thought about being a CEO?
Wow. And
I said, actually, I have thought about being a CEO. And they said, well, we think that you're the perfect fit. And I think it was about 9 days later that I started at Solo Stove. It was a much different company. When I started the business, we were about, I think I was the 7th employee.
Wow.
Somewhere around
How many do you have now?
And now we're about 390-ish.
Wow. And let's talk numbers. I mean, the numbers, obviously you went from, single digits to triple digit employees, which means that your revenues also were exponential.
They went berserk. So we just went public a few weeks ago. So now I'm on this, I can only share what's public. But when I joined the business, we were about 10 to 11 million of revenue. And the first 6 months of this year, we did, just in the first half of the year, about 157 million.
That's amazing.
About 3 years later. So
that's just amazing.
It's been pretty wild ride.
Well, I think right now people are sitting out there and thinking, wow, the hard work that you put in at the ranch.
For sure.
I mean, that's a lesson. Having the mentor of your father at a young age and having a strong woman behind you, a strong spouse behind you, now as an adult. But then also having somebody see something in you that they saw in you. And really you went in to build the sales team and they saw a CEO. Did you see a CEO? Like, did you ever imagine I'm going to be the CEO of this company that's going to go public?
Definitely did not see myself being the CEO of a public company. There's no way. I viewed myself as a CEO. I felt like I could do it. I've always had this mentality for myself. Like I've always operated with a little bit of a chip on my shoulder. I've never been the smartest person in the room. I went back and got my MBA. I was probably the least smart student in our cohort. But I kind of always took pride in like, this is again, going back to the lessons from my dad, but working hard, being the hardest worker in the room will always benefit you more than being the smartest person in the room. And I've always just had that mentality. And so I wanted a shot. That's all I really wanted, was a chance to put that hard work to work and couple. I kind of fell in love with operations during my MBA. So I was a sales guy, kind of labeled sales guy, with just a love for operations, and thought, man, what if I could put those two things together? Mm-hmm. And that's why I wanted the shot to be the CEO, so I could call the shots, not just on the sales side, but the rest of the business, and really help, kind of bring everything full circle and came together.
It sounds like you've mastered strategy. And strategy is so important. And it really is all of the components you just mentioned. But strategy is a little bit different for companies that are built to the consumer. Yeah. And you are direct to consumer.
Yes.
Your company is.
Yes.
So talk to the viewers a minute about how that is different when you're the leader of a company that is direct to consumer versus if you're business to business.
Yeah, and I've been on both sides for sure. I spent a lot of my career on the sales side and business, so understand that side. I think one of the greatest things that I would say that I execute on or think about, especially even thinking about strategy, is so many people, when you say the word strategy, immediately think meetings and boardrooms and, whiteboards and ideating and all of these things. And that is not how I approach strategy at all. I approach strategy on the go. I'm a doer. And I would much rather figure out my strategy while I'm moving than while I'm stationary. And so for me, strategy hasn't been a sit down and ideate and come up, figure it all out with four walls around you. It's been out in the wild, figuring out, iterating, learning, and then pivoting as you're going. And I've found that to be immensely successful, at least for our business. And I think a lot of it, again, to your point around direct to consumer, has been how in the world in a direct to consumer business could I sit inside of a boardroom and strategize how to take care of a customer when the customer can just tell me. And so we love being out with the customers and listening to the customers and letting them dictate the strategy. And then we just operate the business based on what they tell us to do.
Well, John, I think that kind of goes along with the culture. So the culture in your company is quite unique, and you kind of have a reputation for building a unique and successful culture. So talk to our viewers a minute about that culture and how you've built that culture and how it's different because of the nature of the business.
So we have this foundational pillar at the bottom of our culture values within our business that is customers, company, self, in that order. And it is pretty counter to the world that we live in. Today, I think generally, if you were to go to a human resource conference or something like that, you would hear a lot about employee well-being and take great care of your employees. And if you do that, then they'll take great care of your company and your customers. And I'm sure that that's very true. At Solo, we just think about it in the reverse order. We decided a long time ago that we were going to take care of our customers first and foremost, and we were going to take exceptional care of them. And second, we were going to take care of the company after we've taken care of the customer, which means we're not always making financially prudent business decisions for our company because our customer requires us that we do something that's not as profitable for the business.
Right.
But if we do that well, and then lastly, take care of ourselves, that there's always a lot left over to take care of ourselves. And I'm super proud that we have a team at our company that puts themselves last, that puts our customer first and our company second. And what that's allowed us to do is take incredible care of our employees in the end. Mm-hmm. And I think that they would say it's an incredible place to be. I think they've all done better financially, and just overall well-being and so on and so forth than they ever expected because we've done things in that order. So a little unconventional, but it's worked for us.
Yeah, it may be unconventional, but it's also wise. I think there's so much wisdom. I don't
hear people call me wise very often, so I'll take it.
Yeah, there's a lot of wisdom to that because you're right. If you're doing your job right, then the company will do well. You'll be proud of yourself, and you'll have an increased earning potential because the company's doing well.
Right.
I mean, it's logic. What it is.
To me, it is very logical. Again, never been the smartest guy in the room, but I always just kind of thought.
Yes, but you've just been called wise, so
I know. Well,
it's official.
Listen, it's maybe I'm turning a new leaf here, but it has, to me, it's the practical and prudent thing to do. Take great care of your customers, and your customers are going to take great care of your company, and that's been the case. I mean, we have a 45% referral rate at our business.
Nice.
45% of our business comes because a customer tells their friend or family member, you've got to go buy a product from this brand. And that I will hang my hat on because with a 45% referral rate, you can keep your customer acquisition costs low, which drives profitability, and that profitability
allows you. You're not spending it on outsourced marketing.
On a bunch of outsourced marketing.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's great. I called you wise for a reason, but wisdom doesn't come with some failures. And you may notice there's a circled F on front row to CEO. That's because I believe, and I know to be fact, that when we fail, sometimes that's when we learn the most.
Yep.
So tell me about a time that you missed the mark, and what did you learn from it?
Yeah, it's funny that you use that word fail. In my business, in full transparency, in case my team watches this, I'm never going to be called a hypocrite. I actually say at our business, you either succeed or learn. There is no fail, because life is about iterating, and failures are really just learning opportunities. And I truly believe that. But one of the greatest learning opportunities that I've experienced was early in my career. I was in sales, and I was working with a customer, and basically they had kind of explained to me what their need was, and I didn't dig in super deep. I felt like I heard what their need was, and I went out to go and deliver to make sure that the product that I was getting to them was going to meet that need. And it turns out that the product that I delivered, what I sold them on that I thought was going to meet their expectation, ended up being a colossal failure. Much.
You just used the word.
I know. Much farther underneath what their expectation was. And I learned in that moment that life and business, which are not that far different actually,
right,
is all about finding out what the expectations are of anyone that you're dealing with, and then exceeding them. Not meeting them, and certainly not missing them, but if you will just figure out the expectation of anyone you're dealing with, and then slightly beat it, you will be immensely successful. And it's in your relationships, whether with your spouse, with your children, with your friends, with your parents. It's in business with your colleagues. It's in business with the people that work for you. And it's definitely in business with your customers. If you can figure out what the expectation is and slightly beat it, you will blow people's minds every time. The difficult thing is that everybody's expectations are at different places.
Right.
The mistake we make in life, and especially in business, is that we think we approach something with, this is the expectation, and let's go and exceed that. And then you figure out every now and then even if it's a high bar, that you have customers that fall outside of that sometimes and you disappoint them. And then you're trying to figure out, oh, that's just an unruly customer, or, that's not a customer we really want. We tell ourselves to make ourselves feel that way. At Solo, what we do is try to ask the right questions to figure out that one customer, where's their expectation, and then blow their mind. And when you do that, you get a 45% referral rate.
That's right. That's great. I've told my staff time and time again that everyone has a sign on them that says, I'm special. And you got to figure out what that means. Like, how do you make them feel special?
Yep.
And it's not the same
I
for
love
everybody.
that. I actually really love that.
Yeah.
Because special for some people
it's
is
totally different.
Know my name.
Right.
And special for other people is overnight this package and cover the cost and don't even think about charging me.
Right.
And for that customer, that's what's right. It may not be our fault, but it is our problem.
Yeah, I love that you're flexible in how you deal with each customer too.
Yeah, for sure.
It's I see a theme, right? We're really carrying the flexibility theme forward because it seems to have a lot of applications.
Yeah, for sure.
So as a CEO, what's something you wish you would have known about being a CEO that you didn't know when you accepted the role?
I think if we were to go back to flexibility, I would love to say I wish I would have known that being flexible was better. But the truth is if I wouldn't have learned it and somebody would have told me that, I wouldn't have listened, I don't think. So because of that, I would say the thing that I wish that I would have known is how important people are inside of an organization. I think that the bigger the organization gets, it's a little bit counterintuitive, but when the company was smaller and it was fewer people, I felt like I had more control. And if somebody didn't do their job, I would just go do it for them. Mm-hmm. And so I could or somebody else could do it for them. And so in the end, you could kind of overcome people challenges by just being willing to work harder.
But you can't step in for
390 people, right? It's like you're toast. And so you figure out as you become responsible for a larger organization, how critical people are and how it's important not to leave them behind as you're moving so quickly. And we have moved really fast. So just understanding the power and importance of people and making sure that everybody's being brought along, I think is something that I've learned and wished I would have known earlier.
Well, your company it's kind of the poster child for growing pains because you had everything just kind of blew up and it happened so fast, and it happened at a time when a lot of companies weren't growing.
Right. It was going the other way. Yeah.
Right. So how do you advise others in leadership roles about this exponential growth, about growing pains and how to handle those growing pains? Is there just like one formula you follow or one bit of advice you can give them if they're a company that's seeing incredible growth, and sometimes that can be scary?
Yeah. I think that it's not getting fixated on any one part of your business. Growth, especially exponential growth, has to happen everywhere or you're going to mess something up. Mm-hmm. Whether it's supply chain, whether it's people, whether it's your customers or product innovation, inventory, you kind of go across the board, and every aspect of your business has to come up at least at some baseline minimum pace, or you're going to miss the mark. And I think that that's where we've been immensely strong, is our team has done an exceptional job at Solo at honing in on every area of the business and not letting anything fall behind. And it's taken especially a lot of focus and emphasis by our leadership team. So all of the heads of all of those functional areas have been like, I don't want to be the bottleneck. I don't want to be the one that holds the rest of the company back, because we can only grow as fast as you're only as strong as the weakest link.
Right.
And the leadership team has been phenomenal at basically bringing up all of those functional areas simultaneously. And it's almost been like this beautiful synchronized rowing exercise where, we're like those rowing, teams that you see where literally every paddle is hitting the water at the same time and driving that boat forward, versus one paddle out of sync and the boat's going in circles.
That is a great visual.
Yeah.
A perfect visual for what you're explaining there. Now let's go down a little John Merris road here. What was it like being in John Merris's childhood home?
It was pretty crazy. So I grew up in a home with 6 children. I had 3 older sisters, a younger sister and a younger brother. And I will still say to this day, my mom's amazing, but I was in large part, besides my mom, raised by my older sisters. And I wouldn't have had it any other way. If it would have been 3 older brothers, I'd be a totally different person today than I am. Especially my oldest sister. She still to this day is near and dear to me and kind of a second mom. But it was pretty crazy. We were wild and rambunctious. My parents both come from super different backgrounds. My mom grew up, she was a country girl from the panhandle of Texas. And my dad was adopted from a German orphanage when he was 4 by a serviceman in the Army, and then brought back to the U.S. and was an Army brat from there, and moved around a lot. And so just very different backgrounds. And I'm a big believer that every generation should get a little bit better. And one of the things that was just phenomenal to watch with my parents, especially as an adult looking back, is how much better they provided for us than they had as kids. And I think my wife and I kind of look at that and just want our generation, right, our kids, to have it maybe just a little bit better than we had it. And every generation should just get a little bit better.
Well, that leads me into the next question, which is, how is it different for your kids growing up in your home as you're now the parent? And kind of contrast that a little bit.
The hardest job that I've ever had in my life is being a dad. Full acknowledgement. It's the most rewarding, but it is so hard. It is hard. And I fully acknowledge it. Your kids are unpredictable. You can't fire them. And then there's so much of you inside of your kids. Your kids know you so well. They know what buttons to push, and so on and so forth. But I would say, again, back to kind of my comment around wanting the generation to be better. I think for my wife and I is trying to find the balance in today's day. And it is so different even than when I was a kid, but trying to find the balance between letting your kids fail and make their own decisions and find their autonomous way while still protecting them and teaching them and, telling them sometimes, not teaching them, so that they can learn and grow the way that you think is going to be best for them. But it's like a trial and error every day, it feels like. So, but we try to have a ton of fun. It's a good mix of work and fun. I was telling somebody that I work with the other day that we've been introducing our older children that are 14 and 12 to doing their own laundry.
Nice.
And one of our colleagues was like, what? Like 12 and 14 doing that? I'm like, yeah, it's a great, it's the washing machine's right there. That's not by hand. I mean, we don't have them on a scrub board in the sink.
You could though.
We could.
And you could
but we're talking,
a big long white fence too.
Exactly. So we're just trying to make sure that they have, I feel like today's society is getting a little bit easier on the younger generation, and they're having fewer opportunities to work and to do hard things. And we have this philosophy at our house that we are going to learn and appreciate how to do hard things. And that's, I think, not a lot different. You're asking kind of what's different. I'm finding that there's a lot more similarities than there actually are differences for our kids than the way it was growing up for me.
Do your kids get an allowance?
They do not get an allowance. So we haven't done allowances. We'll share, we'll give money to them if they're going out and doing something with a friend, or something like that, but they have chores. Mm-hmm. They have chores with no allowance. So it's, it's kind of a bit of a balancing act, but we set one of the best things that we've done that our 14 and 12-year-old are already thinking about heavily is they really want cars when they turn 16, and we're having them, I will match dollar for dollar.
That's what we did.
So they can, if they earn $1,000, they can afford a $2,000 car. If they earn
and the more they research how much cars cost,
well,
it's amazing.
My 12-year-old daughter has already she's got it figured out what she wants. She's like, that's not cheap, like how am I gonna? I'm like, you better start babysitting now, So, right. So no, they have this work ethic already. My son, is totally gearing up to be a warehouse worker this summer at 14. for solo, because he's
That's
like,
great.
I'm
Little manual labor that's really
100%.
good for the soul.
Absolutely, especially if summer's in Texas in the warehouse.
That's right.
So, yeah.
It almost trumps the
white
field
fence. Yeah,
and the white fence.
The chiggers and it was. He probably could use some ranch work too, but warehouse is pretty close.
That's right. Well, okay. I love to end these interviews with maybe the hardest question that I can ask you, and that is, what would little John Merris, the young version of you, say to you now?
Oh man. Gosh, I don't know the answer to that question. I think that the young John Merris would tell the old John Merris to not stop having fun, to spend more time with his kids.
Yeah.
I did not think I would
It's
get emotional
thought-provoking, isn't
today,
it?
but
Yeah.
he would say, don't forget about the young ones.
Oh, that's great advice. Thank you so much for viewing Front Row to CEO, and thank you, John Merris, for joining me here on the show. And I hope that you've learned something today about leadership and about how you can strive to be in the C-suite. I'm Judy Gaman, and this was an episode of Front Row to CEO.